integrity. That's a word we throw around a lot. And you have a definition running through your mind of what integrity is. And as a matter of fact, you're probably thinking of news headlines or of things that you have read or heard this week and thinking about what integrity isn't. You have a definition of integrity, and the question is it the right definition of integrity? This summer, I had the privilege of teaching through the book of James, and this is what he says in James chapter 1, verse 2. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, lacking anything. If we were to translate that idea of becoming mature and complete and not lacking anything, the actual definition for that is integrity. It's complete, it's lacking nothing. There is no fracture or division, it is whole. Nothing missing from the equation. Now, you know what that is? A little crowd response. Do you know what that is? The Titanic. Yeah, and so if you've read any history or you watch the movie and you're like holding somebody right now, if you've watched the movie, you know that this is the ship above all other ships, that it was unsinkable as the biggest ship ever made, and it was indestructible. Nothing could take it down. The irony in that is it sank, right? And so this ship was put together. It was designed years and years, being manufactured and put together. And it was the lap of luxury. They stepped on this boat with the belief that it was indestructible. However, into the whole process, the ship hits an iceberg. And that iceberg breaks a chasming hole in the Titanic. And that breach of the ship's integrity. So integrity in nautical terms is that this vessel is wholly together. It's not lacking anything. It has no holes in it. It is strong and sturdy, and it will float. The lack of integrity is a breach in the structure. What is pictured on the outside is different on the inside, or vice versa. What is true on the inside is not true on the outside. For hours and hours, the people on the decks of the Titanic did not know there was any problem with the Titanic. But we know eventually they understood what was true in the dining room was not true in the hole in the ship. That is the lack of integrity. God shows his power through integrity. God shows his power through making our broken lives whole and complete, with nothing missing. Despite how bad we are, despite what we lack, God fills in the gaps through the power of the Holy Spirit. The idea behind this is we're taking a look at some Old Testament kings, and quite frankly, how they all had a lack of integrity. And we want to look at their lives recognizing that there are things we can learn about them. There are things about them that are so much like us that we need to learn. And so this week, we are going to get some ancient wisdom from a guy named Asa. Asa can be found in 2 Chronicles chapter 14, 15, and 16. It says this, and Abijah rested, this was his father, and his ancestors, with his ancestors, and was buried in the city of David. Asa, his son, succeeded him as king, and in his days the country was at peace for 10 years. Verse 2, Asa did what was right in the sight of God. I think you should probably underline that highlighted on your digital copy. Get ready to share that on Instagram, whatever it is. I think this is the beginning of a guy who's searching for integrity in his life. Asa did what was good and right in the eyes of God. How did he do that? That's the question, right? How does one begin to do what is good and right in the sight of God? I'm gonna spell this out for you this way. He cleaned up, built up, geared up, and prayed up. You might just want to write that down, because this is the cycle of doing what is good and right, having a life that's whole and complete in the sight of God. You clean up, you build up, you gear up, and you pray up. So here's how it worked. He says this: he removed the foreign altars and the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down Asherah poles. He commanded Judah to seek the Lord, the God of their ancestors, and obey his laws and commands. He removed the high places and incense altars in every town in Judah, and the kingdom was at peace under him. So what did he do first? He cleaned up. Can we talk about that for a moment? So we walk into this space, and we have a lot in common, because we live in a world that's pretty broken, and there's a lot of bad things they've happened to you. And there's a lot of times you've made some decisions that have wrecked your life. And the truth is, that happened when you got distracted from what was maybe the most important thing. You got distracted from pursuing God, and something else grabbed your attention. And so in this context, Asa lives in a culture so much like ours. So much like when you wake up, it's like when he woke up. He got out of bed, and there were people all over worshiping different things. And so in our culture, I'll break it down a little bit. Let's just say that it's something like this. There are those in here who have melted down things to create images, or to celebrate images, to cheer and to chant at images. And that's a form of worship for us. And we do it on Sunday afternoon, and Monday night, and on Thursday night, and on Saturday morning. You know what I'm talking about? We melt down not gold and silver, but plastic, and we put it into a form, and then we create a screen with it, and then we use technology, the technology of our day, and we create an image. So let me just try to bring this back, because I've really ticked off some people. I'm not saying that football is bad. And I'm not saying being a sports fan is bad. I'm just saying at times it can distract us. It can distract us from what God wants for us in our lives. And we can become more obsessed with our fantasy team than what God has for us in reality. We can get distracted with the points we've collected instead of, hey, God, what is it you need to do inside of me today? But I can't just pick on those folks, because there's a whole nother group that, music is your deal. And you worship music. You spend more money on downloads than you actually have. And it's that important to you. And you recognize, oh, wow, I listen to this more than I pursue God. It's become a distraction to me. The interesting thing about idol worship is this, is it always takes on a religious form. So religions always have rituals. Religions always have patterns and systems. Religions always have some form of kind of rhythm to them. So here's what I'd like to ask you to do. In a non-judgmental way, I want to ask you to take a look at your life and ask this question. What objects, items, systems do I find myself checking in on regularly, talking about often, needing to know what's next about them, and my whole life begins to revolve around those things? All of those things might be, I can't say for you, but could be a form of idol worship in your life. I could be genuinely honest with you and tell you that I idols in my life that I battle all the time. Battles of arrogance and pride, battles of sports, battles of relationships, battles for making people believe that I've got it all together. These are all battles in my life, and I put systems together to make people get a perspective. And anytime I put that before seeking God, it becomes a system of destruction in my life. And so there are some things in my life I have to clean up. The next thing that Asa does is this, verse 7, verse 6. He built up fortified cities of Judea since the land was at peace. No one was at war with him during those years, for the Lord gave him rest. Interesting. Things are at peace, and he builds up the cities. Verse 7 says, Let us build up the towns, he said. The land is still ours because we have sought the Lord our God. We sought him, and he has given us rest on every side. So they built up and prospered. So here's the deal. Maybe things are pretty calm in your life right now. I don't know how, because it doesn't seem like anybody I talk to ever has a calm moment anymore. But maybe your life is calm, and you've kind of got chill or laxed in your faith. And this is the time we learn from Asa that that's when he builds up. That's when he prepares. One thing I recognize in life is you're either heading towards a battle or coming out of a battle. That's just the way life works. You're either in the current battle or you're coming out of the current battle or you're headed to the next battle. Peace only lasts so long. And that's to keep us on our toes and keep us dependent upon God. And so he builds up and things begin to prosper. Verse 8 says this, Asa had an army of 300,000 men from Judah equipped. I'd underline or highlight that word. Equipped with large shields and with spears, and 280,000 from Benjamin, armed with small shields and bows, and all of them were brave fighting men. So here's the deal. They cleaned up, built up, and then they geared up. They prepared for what was going to come. And then finally, the battle comes. And here's what happened. So he said that there was 300,000 men, maybe total 500,000 people to fight. But the enemy, the Cushites who came against them, if you read down in the next verse, you find out they had over 1 million soldiers. Think about this. Think about being in that moment. The moment where you're looking at the battle against you and you say, wow, that's way too big. There's no way we can win this war. We should tuck tail and run. The interesting thing is this is what happens. It says this in verse 11. Then Asa called to the Lord his God and said, Lord, there is no one like you to help the powerless against the mighty. You get that? Lord, there is nobody like you. There is nobody stronger than you, nobody more powerful than you, nobody more able than you. He calls out to this God who he believes can do unbelievable things. No one can come against you. And so let me then summarize. He prayed up and a miracle happened. I want to tell you, this story, you need to go back and read it. This is a miracle. This isn't just a, wow, he read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and he came up with a great strategy, and he outfought those Cushites. This isn't one of those, they pretended to be dead, and when they came up, they jumped up. No, this was a miracle. This was a miracle on the proportion of Moses parting the Red Sea by God's power. The seas piled up and the Israelites walked through and they were delivered. It was a miracle. This is a miracle the size of marching around a city and saying, God, this city is stronger, more powerful, more fortified than we can do. God, you got to do this. And the walls tumbling down. This is a miracle the size and the proportion of David standing, this small little boy, this teenager standing in front of a giant, a seasoned champion, a warrior. If you've watched Gladiator, the toughest of the tough, and David striking him by the power of God with pinpoint precision, like laser-guided missile. A stone hits him in the exact right place and he crumbles. This is a miracle on proportion of Jesus taking the bread and the fish of a little boy, raising them up and saying, God, there's nothing you can't do. You are awesome. You are unbelievable. And dividing those, and it multiplied as the gift is handed out. A miracle on the size of there's no way this can happen except, God, you do something. That's the size of miracle we're talking about in this moment. So how important is it to pray up? Well, maybe you're here today and you need a miracle. Let me offer you this nugget of wisdom. I think it starts right here. I think we have to clean up, build up, gear up, and pray up. And when we've done what we can do, watch out. God will step into that moment and can do more than we ever ask, hope, dream, or imagine, is what the Apostle Paul says. So I don't know what you come in carrying today, but I do know this. We're all facing some impossible things, and we don't know how they're going to happen, but God can make them happen. Maybe this is a little bit too vulnerable, but, as the lead pastor of this church, I take an immense amount of pressure on myself about the community ministry center that's to your right. And when I look at that, I see what God can do. I see the walls he can tear down. I see the lives he can restore. I see the ministry that can happen. I see the children getting saved. I see the senior adults receiving grief counseling and help. I see unbelievable ministry happening. But from a human perspective, when I look at the gap between what's needed financially and what we have, I say this is impossible. And I got to be honest, I freak out. Is that okay for your pastor to say? Like, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I have to have this hope in me. We're going to clean up, we're going to build up, we're going to gear up, and we're going to pray up and watch out. I don't know how God will do it, but I know he can do it. And so I know that you're doing this, but we are praying Tuesdays at 2 o'clock. If you would set your alarm right now on your phone and say, Tuesday at 2, I'm going to whisper a prayer. I'm going to pray for God to move mountains. I'm going to pray for God to multiply fish, multiply dollars. I'm going to pray for God to do what seems impossible from human perspective. And we're going to wait for a miracle. It seems impossible, but I trust we serve a God that makes impossible possible. And so, Chapter 14 can really be summarized like this. We got to clean up, build up, gear up, and pray up. Chapter 15 is just a really, really interesting chapter. I love chapter 15 because this is what happens. After God has performed this unbelievable miracle, there is this moment now that there's some soul searching that has to happen. Did you know that most people have their greatest moral failures after a great victory? Did you know that? Did you know that most people face the greatest moral failures after some form of victory? Why is that? Why do you think it is that after we've seen God do something great, that we kind of fall into patterns that may not be the best? There is this interesting thing that happens here in chapter 15 at verse 2. It says this. It says, I got to find it, forgive me. He went to meet Asa. This prophet comes and he said to him, listen to me, Asa, and all of Judah and Benjamin. The Lord is with you when you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. So there's this moment, this declaration of truth. Can I pretend to be a prophet for a moment? Can I give you my best prophet kind of imitation? Can I look you in the eye as a person who deeply cares about you? That cares about your marriage and cares about your finances. It cares about whether you're single or married. cares about whether or not you are going to find God's greatest potential for your life, or you're going to keep coasting. Can I talk to you kind of like a prophet for a minute? I usually don't dare say words like that, but I feel really, really confident. If you will seek God, you will find God. In your life, if you will search for God, He is not in a cosmic game of hide and seek with you. He wants to be found. He's desiring to be found. He actually wants to make, it's like when we lose our car keys. Where are they? Usually in the most obvious place. This is God. God is right here. He's not hiding. We're just overlooking Him. He's not missing. We just aren't looking in the right spot. So what I would say to you is, if you're looking for God to move in your life, then you very well need to do this. You need to seek Him. That means finding some rhythms and patterns to pursue God like maybe you haven't been. Like setting some time aside to say, God, I'm going to pursue you this time every day. If you're like me, that's like murder to tell a person to do something like this every single day, because I'm not a guy who particularly, though I've had to learn to do this professionally, I don't like doing the same thing the same way every day. I don't like eating the same foods. I like new. I like variety. I like being surprised. But one thing I have found is I cannot pursue God in a surprise mentality. I have to build rhythms and rituals and routine into my life. And it's uncomfortable, and I hate it, and sometimes it feels terrible, but I know this, that if I didn't do that, I would not find God. The kings of the Old Testament, this was shared a little bit last week, and I want to kind of circle back. The kings of the Old Testament are a picture of blessing and curse. And let me explain that a little bit further. Asa found the blessing of God, the favor of God, when he sought God and he lived in God's presence. The reason we can say this, when we're obedient to God and seek God, we live in blessing, is because, surprise, the blessing is God. The blessing is being in God's presence. The blessing is the surprise that you discover, oh my goodness, I never dreamed this was possible, but God is actually enough, and He's actually better than what I was hoping for or seeking. Being in God's presence, oh, that's blessing. So if by favor, that's what we mean, then absolutely. Because Jesus puts it like this, if you seek my will, you will find my will. If you live in an undivided way, by the way, that means integrity. If you live for God alone, that means integrity. Then you will find God and He will pour out. If you knock, He will answer. Just over and over, this idea of blessing and favor is being with God's presence. With much or with little, the blessing is God's presence. In the Old Testament, the converse is true as well. When people stop seeking God, they don't experience God blessings because they're not seeking God. I know this is such a simple statement here in 1 Kings 15, but it's a true statement. If we seek God, we'll find Him. Idols in our world are really subtle. Idols in our world, in our lives, they don't necessarily stand out like, hey, I just made a golden calf, because that's one of the things they did in the Bible. Or I set up a Asherah pole and I dance around it. It's not like that. Often it's like our iPhone. We pull it out, and before we know it, we're down a rabbit trail. I mean, it's Alice in Wonderland. Oops, I fell in. And I'm off into worlds unknown. How many of you have an iPhone? iPhone just did a recent updates. Love and hate updates. I don't know about you. But they just did this update now where you can track what you've done on your phone. So like if you were on Facebook, say 12 hours today, it says, hey, Facebook, you were on Facebook 12 hours today. If you are using apps that are quote-unquote productivity apps, you did this much. I'm not joking. Now, I'm going to give a backstory because this is going to sound extreme. The other day, my phone said I was on it for 12 hours. Active use, 12 hours in productivity. Let me now explain why so you don't think I'm an absolute nutball. We were at a conference, and I was taking notes furiously on my phone in the Notes app. And so off and on all day, I was in and out of that, and I was copying and pasting, and I was writing down thoughts. But at the end of the day, I thought, man, if I did this survey of my whole life with stuff, what would it say about how I've sought after God? What would it say about how much time I've spent on, well, let's be honest, trolling other people on social media and thinking, man, I wish I had it as good as them. Oh, some of us, our idol isn't our phone because you're like, that's for you young people, right? Some of us, our idol is our nest egg or our portfolio. It is, someday I'm going to have this much, and you spend hours jockeying your money here and there. So anyway, spend hours reconciling all of that stuff. But let me ask, how much time have we spent reconciling our words and our actions in our pursuit of God? See, our idols can be, they're various idols. And the question is this, am I really, truly, does my heart, does my money, does my time, does it show my pursuit after God? And that's what chapter 15 is. It's a question of, will you seek me? Now let's jump to the last chapter of Asa's life, at least the last chapter in Scripture, 2 Chronicles chapter 16. So Asa has had unbelievable victory from God. In chapter 15, here's what we discover. When this prophet comes to him and challenges him to look at his life, he takes a little bit of time and discovers in verse 7, there's more idols in my life that I have to get rid of. I shouldn't have skipped that, but I did. You may think you've cleaned up, and if you'll go back and look, you'll discover, oh, I missed one. I missed something, because that's what maturity is like. It's a constant growing and discovering that something that yesterday I didn't think was a distraction from God maybe actually is a distraction from God. And so this is what he does. Life starts going pretty well, and he starts experiencing the favor of God. So in chapter 16, here is what happens. Asa grows content. I'd like to say this, fat and happy. He gets unprepared, and a new threat, the next battle, comes along. And this time, he's amassed great deals of wealth. He's had 30 or so years as king, and he has armies and power and mass. When people see him walk down the road, it's, there's King Asa, and he's got position. When he started, he was nobody. He was a young dude, and nobody trusted him. So he had to say, God, help me, there's no way. And as an older guy who won a miraculous battle and has all the leadership competences of building wealth and amassing strength and building buildings and making everything feel great, he's now saying, I'm pretty good. I got this under control. And as the new army arises, he doesn't turn to God. Instead, he says, hey, if we get together and we put our forces together, we're competent, we're strong, we can take out this enemy. By the way, that's what we do in life. We often look for solutions in our own way. We search for things that are out of God's will because they seem easier, because God sometimes takes us through the fire, through the storm, through the ocean, not around it. And so here he is, and this is what the prophet of God says, one of my favorite verses in all of Scripture. 2 Chronicles 16, verse 9. It says this, for the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth. Your translation may say, the eyes of the Lord wander to and fro. And it says this, and he looks to deliver, I've got to find it again. I lost it. I got excited. For the eyes of the Lord range to and fro throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to Him. God looks all over the earth for somebody who is wholly committed to Him. The actual word here, the Hebrew word here, means whole, complete, nothing lacking, no devastating hole in the hull of the ship. This is a life of integrity. God is looking to strengthen the weak if they'll seek Him. God is looking to use people who are wholeheartedly after Him. This is the story of the life of Asa. When his heart was wholly committed to God, God used him. When he wandered away, when he stopped experiencing the presence of God in his life, and things changed. The life of Asa is tragic. It starts so strong and so committed and ends with a half-hearted commitment to God. Can I ask this really tough question? If you had an app for your brain and you could pull it up and it could register all that you do, would there be a big red slice that says this person is wholehearted, committed to God? Full of integrity, there is nothing lacking. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute, but I want to recap the lessons we learned from Asa really quickly. I got 4 things on the screen, but here's the main point. The main point is this: God shows His power through integrity. In a minute, I'm going to reveal how we get integrity. First lesson is this: remove all the obstacles that are getting in the way of knowing God more fully. I'm going to leave it at that. You have some homework to do. You have got to search your life and ask this question. Number 2, intentionally pursue God. High places must come down. Things that we worship must be eliminated. Then we must pursue God. We must build up. We must equip. We must prepare. Third, be careful not to depend on your own resources at the expense of depending on God. I think this is the toughest one for us, gang. We have plenty for the most part. Yeah, I know some of you have more than others, but we have a lot. And we have so much that sometimes it's hard to be dependent upon God. And we think in our kind of me-centered world that I got to come up with all the answers to be worth anything. So don't become overly dependent on you. I think one more. It is possible to start strong and finish weak. So learn from me, this is Asa, and stay the course. Stay the course. James reminds us this, is that the person who perseveres, that person becomes mature and complete with nothing lacking. So I ask you the question, we're going to end with this question. If I were to compare your life to the Titanic right now, at what stage would you be? Are you steaming along in the lap of luxury with no clue what's to come? You're not prepared. One of the most bizarre things I think about the Titanic is the fact that there were not enough lifeboats. It is maritime law that every boat has a life-saving vessel for every soul on board, and they didn't have enough. They were so overly confident that they weren't prepared. Are you cruising along, no idea what's to come? Secondly, are you in the midst of catastrophe. You see the water gushing in, and you're furiously hustling around trying to fix things. Where are you? Integrity is not just about your moral fiber and your fortitude to do good things. It is the reliance and dependence upon God's grace and walking in that and pursuing it and asking God to do things in your life that are impossible apart from Him, which makes your life a miracle with Him. So today